All right, so today and Wednesday are the last classes of the quarter on the problem of evil and suffering. And I don't know how long this is going to take today, but I'm imagining that today's class might take 2 classes, today and Wednesday, which is fine. I'll just do the last class that I want to do on Sunday night, next Sunday night. But I want our class today, I want this class to be very practical. I want it to be a time of learning, hopefully for us, like genuine thinking about how do I respond when another person is suffering? What are some of the things that I need to remember? What are some of the things that I need to do and say? And what are some of the things that I need to not say? So I'll give you an example of some of the stuff that I have in mind for this class. There's pretty regular, I haven't gone to them in quite a while, but the chaplain job over here with the Ellisville Police Department, there's pretty regular trainings that they send us to. And because of, this is one of the, so there's a couple different things that are chaplain responsibilities, like to support officers and to support victims, I don't know what you would call them, people who are suffering. And so there's entire training sessions of this, but they're not from a biblical perspective normally. There's normally like a counselor or some other yahoo that comes in to lead the study, lead the conference, training, whatever. And it's like, okay, so if you have to deliver a death notification to somebody, how do you do that? What do you say? Like, what are the things that you do? And some of those things have been very helpful for me. And I kind of want that to be what we do in this class. Maybe if you're somebody who has not given this a lot of thought, or maybe if you're somebody like me, I know that there's multiple of us in the room because we've talked about it. Maybe you're somebody prone to sticking your foot in your mouth. Maybe we can learn something from this time together. And I would also like, one of my hopes from this time together is, I did get some messages from you, thank you for sharing those, but one of the things that I would like is, if you've got some experience with one of these things that we're going to be talking about, that would be useful to share during this time. Because this is a time, I really think this is a time right now for us to learn. Let's try to learn this morning about what to do and what not to do. So Job is going to be our basis. I think I'm going to try and put all the points that I've listed under something that you can find in Job. And I want to start with Job chapter 1 and verse 13. I expect that probably most of you are familiar with Job's suffering, but I want to start with his suffering so that we can all just be on the same page and see, hey, this is what we're dealing with. It's really bad. The things that are going to happen in this book are ultimately spawned from this really, really bad situation. So Job chapter 1 and verses 13 through 22. Can somebody read that for us to start us off? Job 1, 13 to 22.
Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabins fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, There came another and said, Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose, and tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong.
Okay. So any one of those things is really bad, but this is a perfect example of when it rains, it pours. Like it's just piling on, one thing after the next. And so all of that is external stuff that happened to Job. And then we're going to go to chapter 2 and verses 7 through 10. This is where Satan asks God and is granted from God permission to not just affect Job's life, but to affect Job himself. And so it's going to get worse. Like if you can imagine, oh man, this is really bad. No, it's going to get worse. Chapter 2 and verses 7 through 10. Would you read that, please?
So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God? Shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips.
Okay, so really bad. Let's just make that point number one. It's really bad for Job. So the whole rest of the book of Job is this poetic conversation that Job has with his three friends, and it goes back and forth. Job has a speech, Eliphaz responds, Job has a speech, Bildad responds, Job has a speech, Zophar responds, and we go through 3 cycles of that. And there's just this ongoing conversation where everything spirals and falls apart. That's what happens in Job. Everything spirals and falls apart. Just go ahead and think about it like that. And let's see a couple of things that are going to set this class up. Job chapter 6 and verses 6 and 7. Here is Job's response. This is Job's first response to the first person who talked to him. Job chapter 6 and verses 6 and 7, he says, Can that which is tasteless be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the juice of the mallow? My appetite refuses to touch them. They are as food that is loathsome to me. So I've got a study Bible note on that verse. This is what it says. Rather than tasteful nourishment to Job's grieving soul, Eliphaz's words were like contaminated food. That's the main point here. This is Job's response. Eliphaz has something to say to Job in his suffering, and Job's response is, your words are like rotten food. That's what we're trying to avoid in this conversation. We're trying to not be rotten food. Chapter 6 and verse 15. My brothers are treacherous as a torrent bed, as torrential streams that pass away. So, this is what you're like to me. Job is suffering. Eliphaz comes with words, and Job says, your words are like a flood, a river flood that just comes and washes everything away and leaves nothing in its trail. And then there's one more. Go to chapter 16. Chapter 16 and verses 2 through 5. This is the title of this class. Job chapter 16, starting in verse 2. I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall windy words have an end? Or what provokes you that you answer? I also could speak as you do. If you were in my place, I could join words together against you and shake my head at you. I could strengthen you with my mouth, and the solace of my lips would assuage your pain. So he's saying to this group of people, hey, it's real easy to talk when you're in your situation and not in my situation. If I were in your situation, I could say those words too. But you're miserable comforters are you all. That's the thing that we're trying to avoid. So we're going to look at Job and we're going to say, what are some lessons that we can learn and try and pull in everything that we've done for the last 3 months. You want the first word? Any comments before we get started? All right. Lesson number 1. I just made a little template for every slide. Every slide we're going to look at some examples in Job. We're going to look at some examples in other places, not for everyone. And I didn't change the slide most of the time because I'm lazy. I just copied and pasted and left it. Examples from Job, examples from other places in the Bible. I have a book. I got a physical book. It's like an encyclopedia, but I have one on my Bible software called, I think it's just like quotes. And it's organized by topic. And you open it up to suffering. And here's a bunch of quotes on suffering. And I just categorized them into the different place. Some of them are neat. And then we'll give some practical examples for everything. All right. Number 1, silence is golden. Let's go to Job chapter 2. Job chapter 2, would somebody please read verses 11 through 13? I think, this is just my opinion. You don't have to take my opinion. But I think these couple of verses are probably the most important, maybe the hardest too. I don't know. I take a lot from these verses. Somebody, would you read chapter 2 and verses 11 through 13?
Saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days, 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great.
At this point, they were still his friends. I think Tracy... where's Tracy? I don't see her. Is she teaching in class downstairs? Tracy had a couple of really good comments about suffering leading up to this that I wrote into some of these notes. Tracy said, I wish I would have just copied and pasted her quote exactly because she said it better than me, but she said something like, suffering is heavy. And it's like, I think that you feel the heaviness of it when you hear what they, especially verse 13, they sat with him on the ground 7 days, 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him, for they saw his suffering was very great. It's that heaviness, I think. And then in chapter 4 and verse 1, Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, I didn't do this in my Bible, but those of you who do marking with me in my Bible, like, I'm tempted to turn those words red. Red is bad. Answered and said. This is where you go wrong. Like, this is where everything starts to fall apart. And then chapter 13 and verses 4 and 5. There's a couple of different places in Job where he says what he wants. He says what he's thinking. Job 13, 4 and 5. As for you, you whitewash with lies. Worthless physicians are you all. Oh, that you would keep silent, and it would be your wisdom. Job's request is, I wish that you just wouldn't say anything, if this is where we are. Chapter 21 and verses 2 through 5. Job 21, 2 through 5. Keep listening to my words, and let this be your comfort. Bear with me. So a couple things here. Keep listening. Bear with me, and I will speak. And after I have spoken, mock on. So his response is, everything that I have to say, like all you're doing is just making it worse. As for me, is my complaint against man? Why should I not be impatient? Look at me and be appalled, and lay your hand over your mouth. Is anybody by any chance at Proverbs 17:28? Go ahead, Morgan.
Even the fool is considered wise when he keeps silent, discerning when he seals his lips.
Yeah. Any great words of wisdom on this point about?
I go back and forth on this, but my understanding is it was the custom of the day to sit in silence for 7 days. That's how they mourned together. But they couldn't wait, it seemed like, for the 8th day. I mean, Job had his say. He's visibly, it says they were shaken by his appearance. They saw, this is bad. And I think there was some compassion there from his friends, but it feels like they could not wait to open their mouths. And they just did the 7 days because that's what was required. But the minute they had an opportunity, they just had to say something.
Yeah.
If they would have been silent on the 8th day, it might have not have even been a story.
Yeah. Do you know, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I more relate to the friends in this situation than to Job, because it is genuinely hard to just sit and this is what runs through my head. What runs through my head is, what am I supposed to say? Like, I don't know what to say. And the longer you sit there with that, the harder it is. You know what I mean? And Job's friends have been sitting here for 7 days. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to take away from this is the idea of, well, I'll have a whole point about this later on. But how about this? Let me see if somebody else's words can do it better than me. Blessed is the man who, having nothing to say, obtains from giving us the worthy evidence, a wordy evidence of that fact. If you don't have anything to say, don't prove it. Here's some more. I got 4 on this one. Silence is better than unmeaning words. I often regret that I have spoken, never that I have been silent. Yeah, Morgan.
This might not be where you're going with this, but, and it might be elementary, but I think it's important to point out silent doesn't mean avoidance. I would think being in their presence is the key, and being with them and the time you put in, is everything. Our family's favorite example is Sam Bagby, when we had a Watson family showing up, and he was sweeping the floor at my mom's house. Sam didn't say a word, but he was serving, and I think, like, if you don't have anything to say, serve them, show up, put time in their home or their hospital room, wherever they are, be with them, and you won't have words that can fix it, but your presence and your service will.
Yeah. I think that's a part of what you see there in Job chapter 2. They show up and they're mourning with him. They're there, but they're not giving him answers and arguing with him at this point.
I think reading through this a second time is making me think about when did their motive shift? Like, were they really sitting there the 7 days in deep sorrow, or was it day 6 and they started tapping their foot? Like they're anxious and ready to speak. And I think it's because of their almost worship that comes up over and over and over again in Job, is what was the cause of this? Maybe it was because you sinned, maybe it was because your family members sinned, maybe it was because of all these other different things. And maybe that should be our warning, is that in our effort to comfort someone, we don't have to open up an investigation as to why the suffering is happening.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I like that. I'm going to push us forward. You're going to see that a lot of these are interconnected and related. So we're not done with this one, but just push it forward here real quick. Number 2 is, hey, Rachel, is there a medical diagnosis called foot and mouth syndrome that you know of? And if there is, would you diagnose me with that thing? Because I'm pretty sure that this is what I have. Look at Job chapter 1. I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm not going to read this one. Job chapter 1 and verses 13 through 19 is the section where Job has just been told that he lost all of his kids, all of them, in one go. And you really have to know that as you get to the very first person's response. Job chapter 5 and verse 17. This is Eliphaz. And this is the very first response after Job has been lamenting. Verse 17, behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves. So first of all, think about just these words. It's true. Those are true words. He's not wrong about that. But here is Job on, what did we say, the 8th day. He's just lost literally everything, including his health. And Eliphaz's words are, blessed is the man who God reproves. That's not even the point of this one. Therefore, despise not the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He shatters, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles. In 7, no evil shall touch you. So, he just lost everything, and Eliphaz's words are, God will heal you and God will deliver you. And you jump down to verse 25. You shall know also that your offspring shall be many, and your descendants as the grass of the earth. This is the reason why I'm here. It's like Eliphaz's words. Job's just lost everything. I keep going back to he's just lost his kids. And Eliphaz's words are, Job, let not your heart be troubled. God will give you more. I know, and it's like, part of me thinks, ooh, come on, man, you didn't know. That's not the time. It's true. That's a true statement. It's how the story ends. It's probably just not the time to say it, is what I'm trying to learn about from this. Same kind of thing, chapter 8. I guess it's not the same kind of thing. It's kind of worse. Chapter 8 and verses 3 and 4. Does God pervert justice? Or does the Almighty pervert the right? If your children have sinned against him, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. So this response is, well, your kids must have deserved it. Yikes on that one. I've got some others. I'm ready for people to start. You can start chiming in here, but let me point you to some other things here real quick. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 19. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. But whoever restrains his lips is prudent. This is the wise thing to do. Just statistic-wise, the more you open your mouth, the higher the probability of saying something that you shouldn't. I like a couple of these. Mark Twain. The difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. It is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. This one wrong word. Lightning bug and lightning is the difference there. Ben Franklin. Remember not only to say the right thing in the right place, but far more difficult still to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. Got anything for us on this one? Yeah.
Well, I think Eliphaz's comments make me think about in today's language when this happens, and sometimes we say God has a plan. It's more succinct, but it's really summing up, I think, what Eliphaz is saying. And I, had a friend of ours that lost his kids in this fire. It was all over the news. Their anniversary wasn't too long ago, for 2 years maybe. There's 4 kids. The mom actually set the whole room on fire, so it was a murder-suicide thing. Tragic. And I remember talking to him because he's a family friend, and we talked a lot, working out over there. And at one point in our discussions, which he still struggles today with the loss, but at one point he says, if I hear one more person tell me God has a plan, I am going to blow up. And he was just really struggling. So it just makes me think of this Eliphaz's comments.
Yeah. I got a couple examples on here for you that I wrote down. This is a little bit different from your God has a plan. Everything happens for a reason. That's a pretty common one, right? That's pretty common. But this is one of the things that I want us to really digest from what we're talking about in this class. Maybe that's true. Everything happens for a reason. But in this case, the reason was, and we know the answer to this. In this case, the reason was because Job was righteous and Satan was attacking him to make a point. That was the reason. But that's not the intent, I think, of the person who says, God has a plan. Everything happens for a reason. And so it's just like, okay, the words might be true, but they can really have they can land poorly, I think. How about this? In the foot and mouth situation, let's avoid the at least trap. When somebody dies and you say, this is one thing that I've done this several times. I'm not picking on anybody in this class, all right? I'm not picking on you. I'm telling you, I feel like I've tried to learn these lessons a little bit. Somebody dies, and sometimes you'll hear, like, the idea is something like this. Well, how old were they? And then the intent is something kind of like, oh, well, they were 70 years old, 75 years old. And it's like, well, at least they lived a good, long life. Okay, yes. But think about how something like that can land. Or the 75-year-old land, 75-year-old has died, and the comment to the spouse is, well, at least you had 40 years together. I'm not really feeling the at least in this moment is the thing that we're trying to learn about from this text. I've got more. We'll just keep going until you stop me and say, look for the silver lining.
So that's the thing, it's not always a need, well, let me say it this way. The people who aren't in it are wanting the person that is in it to look to the future, because right now it's awful. Sometimes the person who's in it just needs other people to feel awful with.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Jesus was on the cross. The 2 robbers were on the cross. One was with him. It's not why we have a family. Why does God promote the family? Why is the husband and the father the burden bearer? All these things God has ordered. say, the Lord has a plan. You can forget all that and say, this is awful, I don't like this, it's very painful. And here we are.
Yeah. So this number 7 on the list, 7 is the last one because there's 7 points. You know there's 7 points. Weep with those who weep. That's where we're going to do the heaviness of the thing.
I think that there can be some difference in intent with some of these statements, like the ones that you've been saying and that Chad have been saying, can kind of give off the impression that like God has done this thing for the purpose. Like what was the one that Chad said?
God has a plan.
Yeah, it kind of they try to like negate how horrible this thing is, and I think there are ways to say that. We're going to look towards the future, and I've been thinking of like God can use everything for His good. Is that Romans 8? I think Romans 8:28, maybe.
Sounds good to me.
I think that's
Romans
right.
8, yeah.
Yeah, Romans 8, and we know that in all things God works for the good.
Yeah.
But that has a different intent behind that, because that's not trying to change how horrible this thing is that happened. Like, this thing is horrible and sad, but God can use it for good. And that just has a different feeling than, like, this is all part of the plan, implying that, like, God wants something bad to happen.
Yeah.
It's a subtle difference, but I think that has helped me when I know I have put my foot in my mouth, thinking about, am I uncomfortable with this person's suffering? And so I'm wanting to brush it to the side or excuse it, versus am I really acknowledging how deeply sorrowful they are, and also reminding them that God is always with us and you can use this for His good.
Yeah. Good. I think the thing I like about that the most is the reminder that none of this is about me. Right? I'm one of Job's friends sitting down with my friend who's suffering, and I feel what I feel, but this is not about me, is the point. I'm almost done with my list here. I know how you feel. No, you don't. Hold on. And let's not be the one-upper. Do you know the one-upper? The one-upper is the, oh, hey, Chuck, you're suffering right there. Let me tell you about mine. What you got?
I think it's really important as we try to think through how we can be better comforters, is to remember that somebody in the circumstances that they're in, like Job, they're not in a good place emotionally to hear things, and even if you have good intentions behind what you're saying, it may not be taken that way, especially if you don't have like a good relationship with them already. So that should make us talk even less.
Yeah, I think that's so. Yeah, so this is a lesson that we learn, but points us back to the first lesson. Melissa's got a great quote on this. She's not here, is she? I don't think so. Melissa's got a lot of good stuff in the class this morning and the lesson this morning too. I think that I've heard Melissa say this, and I think that many of you, this seems to be like just across the board, one of Melissa's sentences that I don't know if it's the right thing to say or a good thing to say, but it seems awfully good to me. Melissa will just tell you straightforward, I'm not good with words, and I don't know what to say, but I see you. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, that's just about as good as anything I can think of to say. But so it's like it's acknowledging, but also it's not making it worse. I want to cover at least this one. We've got a few minutes left. I want to at least get through 3, and this one's important for me to do in this class. It is to remember that suffering people often say and do things that they don't mean and that they later regret. And what I want to do with this point is there's 2 things at the end of this point that we want to take away. One is, if it's your turn to suffer, remember this one. Like, let's try not to do things and say things that we're going to regret and that we don't mean. But the other one is, we're the listeners and the partners in this suffering. Let's be gracious and remember that people often do things and say things that they don't mean and that they regret. Look at a couple of these. Job 6 in verses 2 and 3. Oh, that my vexation were weighed and all my calamity laid in the balances, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. Job acknowledges in the moment. He says, if you take my words and my frustration and you stick it in a balance with all of the sand of the sea, it's not going to balance out. He knows. He recognizes, I'm not in a good place right now, and I'm not saying things that balance. Job chapter 6 and verses 24 through 26. This is what he says about his friends. Teach me and I will be silent. Make me understand how I've gone astray. How forceful are upright words. But what does reproof from you reprove? Do you think that you can reprove words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? You're going to correct me and come down on me when the speech of a despairing man is like wind? That's what he's saying. We have a word for this. We call it venting. You never heard me do any of that, have you? Mark, if you look all over Mark, you're going to see bruises and all kinds of like gouges taken out of him. And that was me venting when it happened. He's the guy. Chapter 10 and verse 1. I loathe my life. I will give free utterance to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. And then he will go on and talk, but he's just acknowledging like, hey, sometimes we do this. I have this one on the list. I don't think I do. Yeah, chapter 2 and verse 9. The chapter 2 and verse 9 example, I think that most of us would accuse Job's wife of being the bad guy in this story. She just had the worst day of her whole life. You think we could just give her just a tiny little bit of grace? Hey, Job, curse God and die. Did she say the thing that was right and true and that she should have said in that moment? Absolutely not. But do we all sometimes do that? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we could probably find it in us to, well, here's one that we can find in ourselves to do. I really like this. Here we go. I went too far. Listen to this. I've got two of them for you here. The Lord knows that his children often speak in their sleep when they are in the delirium of a fever of grief. That's pretty good. How about this one? We must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer. Got that? I'm not going to look at you and think, this is what you said. I'm going to look at you and say, I see what you're living in right now. I think that's probably... there's a couple examples of this one. Psalm 73 in verses 21 and 22. Verses 1 through 20 are the psalmist saying things that he says later, I should not have said those things. Verse 21 and 22, he says, we sing a song about this. What's her name? Joella's mom? Glenda Shales. I think it's her song. When I was something and embittered. I think it comes from here. When my soul was embittered, when I was pricked in heart, I was brutish and ignorant. I was like a beast towards you. It's the acknowledgement that I just said things that I know I shouldn't say because I was in it. I got some examples for you, but I'll let you go first. Anything here?
Job's wife was in it too because she lost all her kids, but she said that.
And her husband. Like, how's she going to eat now?
I think it's important to note that in these passages of Job where he's speaking, there's with his friends and then the other is with God. And sometimes you don't have anyone but God, which is kind of hard, but kind of good, because you're able to vent it all to the one that knows it all and appreciates it all. But kind of hard because you feel alone in this world without that shoulder-to-shoulder, face-to-face camaraderie of someone who's sitting with you genuinely going
Yeah.
through it.
That's why you need a dog like Rocky. To the one who's suffering. Here you go. To the one suffering. A reminder for you. Be mindful that people sometimes do and say things that they regret when they're suffering. Don't lash out. This is, I think, universal advice. I think this is universal advice, and it fits into this point. But it's probably not like now's a good time for us to be thinking about these things. When you have a major life change, like you lose a spouse or you lose a kid or you lose something, a parent, you know the major, like it's pretty universal when somebody says, don't make any big decisions for a year. Right? This is not the first time you've ever heard this. And you know the reason why is because we do things that we regret whenever we're not in a proper headspace. And so to the one suffering, probably remember this point. To everyone else, that Matthew passage up there is the golden rule. How would you like someone to treat you? How would you like somebody to judge your words on the worst day of your life? Would you like for them to be just a little bit gracious towards you? Then that's what we do to other people. It's probably also, this is one of my main takeaways. It's probably not the time to be a hypersensitive person. Do you know what I'm talking about right now? Somebody who's suffering and saying things in the moment might cut you. And now would be a really good time to say, they didn't mean that, and I'm not going to hold it against them at that moment, right? Any extra thoughts on that one? You can disagree with me if you want on any of these. Okay, well, let me show you where we're going. You can let them in just so you can see where the road is coming. Suffering people don't expect you to fix their problem. Be aware of your own insecurities. Here's your one, Erica, that you were talking about. This is not about me. Don't try to justify God because you can't, and God doesn't need you to justify him. And sometimes, like Job's friends, they were wrong. What they said was wrong. I get to stand before God on Judgment Day after having said something wrong. And then weep with those who weep. We'll talk about that one. All right, and then we'll be done with that class. Thanks for your comments.